Okay, so you know how everyone's always talking about how kids are raised and, how that affects them later. Well, today we're going to look at some new research about that, specifically how parenting and a kid's ability to deal with their emotions, is connected to their choices about pornography use.
It's definitely something a lot of people think about,
Yeah,
especially parents and educators and really anyone who works with young people.
right.
And we found this recent study that dives right into this topic.
Okay.
It's called Parenting Style, Differentiation of Self, and Pornography Use Among Adolescents, Exploring the Links. It was published in January in the Journal of Sex Research.
So pretty recent then.
Yeah, very recent. And it looked at a huge group, over 7,000 Hispanic adolescents between 12 and 17 years old from multiple Spanish-speaking countries.
Wow, that is a lot of data.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do today is go through the main points and pull out what's most important for you, so you can see these connections without getting lost in the research jargon. Okay, so the first thing they looked at was just how many of these adolescents said they used pornography. What was the overall finding there?
Well, about a third of the adolescents in the study said they'd used pornography in the past year.
Okay, so that's a pretty significant number right there.
Yeah, it is.
But I'm guessing there's more to it than just the overall number.
You're exactly right. One of the biggest things that jumped out at us was the difference between the genders.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 56% of the male adolescents had used pornography compared to just 14.5% of the female adolescents.
Wow, that is a huge difference. It kind of makes you wonder right away what's going on there. Like, are there different societal expectations at play? Maybe different ways that boys and girls are, dealing with all this stuff as they grow up.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the parenting part of this research. What exactly were they looking at when they talked about parenting styles?
So they focused on two main things they called warmth and demandingness.
Okay, let's start with warmth. What exactly does that mean in this context?
Warmth basically describes how much affection and support and genuine interest the parents show their kids. Things like being a good listener, offering help, just enjoying their company.
Right, so it's that feeling of being cared for and connected.
Exactly.
Okay, and the demandingness. What's that all about?
Well, that has more to do with rules and supervision. So, setting boundaries around things like how much screen time the kids get, making sure they're managing their money responsibly, keeping track of what they're doing online and in other media.
So basically, how much the parents are setting expectations and keeping an eye on things.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what did they find about how these two parenting styles relate to the kids using pornography? Let's start with the warmth aspect.
Okay, so what they found was that when the parents showed more warmth, the kids were less likely to use pornography. And what's really interesting is that this connection was even stronger for girls.
That makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
Like maybe for girls, having that really strong sense of support from their parents is even more important when it comes to navigating, potentially difficult content like that.
It seems that way.
Okay, what about demandingness? What did the study show about that?
So the study found that higher demandingness was also linked to the kids using pornography less. But there were a couple of important differences here. First, this link was stronger for boys.
Oh, so the opposite of warmth then?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's interesting. And what was the other difference?
It was also stronger for younger adolescents, those between 12 and 14 years old.
So maybe it's that in those early teen years, setting those clear limits and providing that supervision has a more noticeable impact. And maybe for boys in particular.
Right, and the researchers suggested that a parenting style that's high in both warmth and demandingness, it could mean that parents are more likely to have open and honest conversations with their kids about sexuality, and maybe that these kids are less influenced by their peers when it comes to risky stuff.
All right, so it's not just about being strict or just being loving. It's that balance of both that seems to make a difference.
That's what the research indicates, yeah.
Okay, so now let's get into something called differentiation of self. That sounds a little complicated. Could you explain what that is in plain language?
Sure. Basically, differentiation of self, or DOS for short, it means being able to have your own thoughts and feelings, to know who you are as a person, while still being able to stay emotionally connected to other people. It's a really important part of how we manage our emotions. The study looked at two main parts of DOS: emotional reactivity and emotional cutoff.
Okay, emotional reactivity and emotional cutoff. Break those down for us. What do they actually mean?
Okay, so emotional reactivity is how intensely a person reacts to things. Like if someone's really sensitive to emotional triggers and they have trouble staying calm or thinking clearly when things get heated, that would be high reactivity.
Right.
And lower reactivity would mean they're better at regulating those emotions.
Got it. Okay, so what about emotional cutoff?
Emotional cutoff is about creating distance in relationships. It's like when someone avoids difficult conversations or pulls away when they're stressed.
Oh, so it's almost like they're trying to handle tough emotions by shutting down the connection.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, so now tie all that back to the pornography use. What do they find?
Well, this is a pretty interesting finding. They found that people with better emotional regulation, meaning lower emotional reactivity, were less likely to use pornography.
Hmm.
And this was true across the board. Boys, girls, younger adolescents, older adolescents. It was consistent.
So it's like the better kids are at handling their emotions, the less they turn to pornography.
It seems that way, yeah.
Okay, and what about emotional cutoff? Did that show any connection?
This one's a little surprising. Emotional cutoff wasn't significantly linked to pornography use for any of the groups. You might think that if someone has trouble with emotional closeness, they might be more likely to turn to pornography, but this research didn't find that connection.
So maybe it's not as simple as we might think. Okay, so how did the researchers explain the connection between emotional reactivity and pornography use?
They think that for adolescents who have trouble regulating their emotions, pornography might be kind of a way to cope. Like they might be trying to deal with difficult feelings by escaping into something else, even if it's not really a good long-term solution.
That makes sense. If you're feeling overwhelmed, that kind of immediate stimulation could seem like an easy way out, even if it doesn't actually fix anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so were there any other things besides parenting and emotional regulation that the study found to be linked to pornography use?
Yeah, there were a few others. One was age. Older adolescents between 15 and 17 were more likely to report using pornography, and that was especially true for boys.
So it kind of goes along with what we were saying earlier about the developmental differences between boys and girls.
Yeah, it seems that way. Another factor was how easy it was for the kids to access the internet. Having unrestricted internet access, like a smartphone with a data plan and no filter, was linked to higher odds of pornography use, but only for boys.
Okay, so we've got age, easier internet access, any others?
Yep. They also found that higher levels of religiosity were connected to lower odds of pornography use, especially for girls and older adolescents.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is.
So to sum up for our listeners, what's the big picture here?
Well, it seems like a few things are really important. First, how parents interact with their kids, how much warmth they show and how much they set limits, is definitely linked to how likely the kids are to use pornography. But it's not one size fits all, because these connections seem to be different for boys and girls and for younger and older teens. But maybe even more important is a kid's ability to manage their emotions, especially being able to avoid overreacting to difficult situations.
So it's really a combination of factors then.
Right.
It's not just one thing. And of course, we have to remember that these factors probably interact in really complex ways that a single study can't fully explain.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so before we wrap up, what are some of the things we should keep in mind about the limitations of this study?
Well, the biggest one is that the information about the parenting styles and the kids' emotions and their pornography use all came from the kids themselves. They were the ones answering the question. So there's always the possibility that they might not have been totally honest.
Yeah, especially when you're asking about something like pornography use, it can be hard to get totally accurate self-reported data.
Right.
Okay, what
There's another limitation is that they only asked one question about pornography use, and they didn't really define what pornography meant. So different kids might have had different ideas about what they were being asked about.
Right, that could definitely affect the results.
And one more thing to remember is that this study was cross-sectional. So they collected the data at one specific point in time. That lets us see connections between things, but we can't say for sure if one thing causes another.
Right. It could be that one thing is causing the other, or it could be something else entirely.
Exactly.
Okay. So to wrap up for our listeners, what would you say are the most important takeaways from this research?
I think the biggest takeaways are that how parents interact with their teens really matters. And a teen's ability to handle their own emotions seems to play a big role too.
So for all of you listening, think about this, how we connect with young people and how they learn to handle their feelings. It's all connected. What are some things we can do maybe in subtle ways to help kids get better at managing their emotions? And could that actually influence the choices they make about online content, even if we don't see the connection right away? It really makes you think about how everything's tied together.
Absolutely. And even though this study gave us some great insights, the researchers themselves say that we need more research, especially studies that follow kids over time. That would give us an even better understanding of how all these things work together.
Great food for thought. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
No problem.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.